Hello, everyone. My name is Bianca Ladriga, and I'm the Senior Global Affairs Analyst at CNN. On behalf of the Texas Tribune, I'm delighted to welcome you to the 2021 Texas Tribune Festival discussion of both sides, how to address the increase of migrants at the border, currently at a 20-year high, with both compassion and proper security measures in place. I'm happy to be joined today by Texas Congresswoman Veronica Escobar. She has represented the state's 16th congressional district since 2019, the first Latina to represent the district. She sits on the House Armed Services Committee and Judiciary and Ethics Committees and is vice chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus. She's also the co-chair of the Women's Working Group on Immigration. I'm also joined by Ali Noorani. He is the executive director of the National Immigration Forum, a nonpartisan organization working to promote the value of immigrants and immigration since 2008. Previously, he served as the executive director of the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition and is the host of the Only in America podcast. Welcome, both of you. It's great to be with you. I wish it was in person, but maybe next year.
Hopefully, that's what we said last year.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, hopefully next year. Great to be with all of you.
There's a Jewish saying, next year in Jerusalem. So, maybe next year in Austin. We can do that. I'd be happy to be back in my home state, my adopted home state of Texas as well. So Congresswoman, let me begin with you. News from the Supreme Court saying that the Biden administration must comply with the ruling to restart the Remain in Mexico program for asylum seekers that was put in place by his predecessor, President Trump. How will that impact President Biden's initiatives and policies related to border? And what are your thoughts on the ruling as a whole?
The ruling was shocking and deeply disappointing. And I think it's important for context for us to understand this was a policy put in place by Stephen Miller and Donald Trump. And their perspective is that cruelty can be a deterrent. And we know, in fact, that that is not the case. No matter how cruel they got, it did not deter or eliminate or even slow down migration. This has a real ability to harm President Biden's efforts going forward and to really hamstring him. And I think the other component that is important to understand and look at is, a lot of folks are talking about how apprehensions are at an all-time high on the border. Part of that is because of some of those leftover Donald Trump policies, like Title 42, where people keep making the same attempt over and over and over again. These are not policies that do any good. These are not policies that address problems or challenges as they relate to migration. It is a real setback, especially for human rights.
Ali, would you agree?
Absolutely. The migrant protection protocols, as they were formerly known, or Remain in Mexico, it began as a unilateral decision by the Trump administration to force families to wait in Mexico. And it has continued as really a unilateral decision by the Supreme Court to keep the policy in place. The questions will be, okay, how does Mexico react? We have already seen, because of the Title 42 public health restrictions, massive numbers of migrants, whether they're from Central America, elsewhere, or even from other parts of Mexico, really be pinned up against the border along cities and towns along the U.S.-Mexico border. So the AMLO government in Mexico is really faced with a pretty big decision. Are they going to cooperate with the Biden administration? Are they not going to? How do they manage this? And, look, I think the only people that are winning in this situation are the cartels. The cartels are in a position to prey on the families that are stranded in Mexico because of whether it's Title 42 or Remain in Mexico. And, quite frankly, I really do think as a nation, we have outsourced our immigration system to the cartels, and they are making a pretty handsome profit as a result.
Congresswoman, to pick up on that, a few weeks ago, I had interviewed the former foreign minister from Mexico, who said that the U.S. isn't doing enough to focus on and have AMLO in Mexico crack down on some of their own problems, being corruption, being the drug cartels, as Ali just mentioned, and that the U.S. is sort of giving Mexico a free pass in the sense that as long as they can take care of some of our border issues, Mexico doesn't have to pay its fair share of focusing on their domestic issues. What do you make of that? Is that a valid argument?
I think that it's the relationship with Mexico is critically important. They are a key trading partner for us. Communities like El Paso, the community that I represent, we are deeply intertwined with our sister city across the border, Ciudad Juarez, interconnected on many fronts. There's just not been enough collaboration, I think, on COVID as an example, and on other issues. And so my hope is that the White House will continue to amp up diplomatic efforts to work with Mexico. But I do think Mexico, we have to confront many of the problems that stem from within Mexico that AMLO has absolutely failed to address. What we are now seeing, and actually we have been for some time now, we're seeing asylum seekers from Mexico. So we have Mexicans arriving at our nation's front door seeking asylum because of the threats and the danger and the risks in their own home country. It is very, very, very complicated. But part of these important diplomatic relationships and these our partnership and our being neighbors is holding each other accountable, and we have to do that.
Ollie, President Biden as a candidate promised to be a kinder, gentler, more humane president, and to offer a more humane approach to the border crisis, including an effort to end the family detentions and the separations among asylum seekers. 8 months in, how would you rate his performance early on in his administration?
Well, I think the intention is there to treat people compassionately, yet keep the nation secure. I mean, the intention is very clear, as opposed to the Trump administration. Their intention was to treat people cruelly and really close the United States off from the rest of the world. The challenge here for the Biden administration, particularly at the border, is to put in place the personnel, the logistics, and the infrastructure so that these processes can run in a smooth and effective way. And that means that, moving immigration judges to the border, putting in place the asylum officers, so they can adjudicate cases. They're beginning to do those things. And that's why, going back to the Supreme Court decision, when a wrench gets thrown into the works that way, it kind of pushes them back multiple steps. We do think that the work at the border is just so important, particularly in terms of making sure that facilities are licensed and are caring for whether they're unaccompanied children or families or even single adults. So there's a lot of work that remains to be done. But from our perspective, it really comes down to, those three things: personnel, logistics, and infrastructure, so that these processes are working effectively and efficiently.
Congresswoman, what would you say? How would you rate his first 8 months?
I think that the president is doing everything that he can, and the White House is doing everything they can to, as quickly as possible, change the dynamic. They have brought on board some of the most incredible, talented, compassionate, brilliant people to work on these issues. And what they have gotten, or what they inherited rather, was a deeply broken system. And I will tell you, my view is, and I've communicated this with Secretary Mayorkas, I've shared this with Senator Dick Durbin and members of my own party, and I'll be introducing legislation. What we need is a whole new vision for how we do immigration and how we process people. And we cannot keep doing things the same way over and over and over again and expect a different result. As I mentioned at the top of our conversation, the Trump administration believed that if you could be as cruel as possible, you would deter migration. That we saw that was not the case. I mean, we were horrified and we watched in horror, but we saw that was not the case. The challenge is, our immigration policy shouldn't begin and end at the border. And that's been the approach for decades. And so we've had prior administrations who have not done an effective job of talking about this in a hemispheric way with hemispheric leaders. We have had prior administrations that have focused on hardening the border as though that would end migration or curb it. And we have had Congress that has punted on immigration reform. So we need a new holistic approach. And part of it includes what Vice President Kamala Harris is doing in engaging Western hemispheric partners. That has to be broader, though, because we're seeing migration coming from a whole host of other countries. This is a shared responsibility and obligation. So addressing root causes is critically important. Updating and modernizing immigration laws is critically important, and changing the way we process people at our nation's front door is also critically important. It can't be or shouldn't be done all at the border, or we shouldn't believe that if you harden the border enough, build enough walls, buy enough drones, hire enough personnel, that you'll stop it. It's time for a whole new vision.
Holly, you just heard the Congresswoman say that the Congress is punting on immigration reform, and it seems that where the Congress is punting, the courts are stepping in and really tying the president's hands, really on any issues that he wants to see fulfilled through his administration. Is this something that we can anticipate going forward in the Biden administration? Just the courts ruling where Congress won't?
So the legal strategy that's implemented by the opposition to immigrants and immigration is really quite sophisticated, for lack of a better term. They're intentionally starting cases through the Fifth Circuit, probably the most conservative circuit in the country, and that really stacks the deck against the Biden administration and advocates. On the other hand, the Ninth Circuit, in fact, ruled MPP, the Migrant Protection Protocols, to be illegal. So, yes, to answer your question, we are going to see the courts continue to play a very, very important role. I mean, look, under the Trump administration, the courts managed to really, throttle many elements of what the Trump administration tried to do. But ultimately, we've got to get Congress to move forward on immigration reforms. There are points of consensus now. I mean, there are points of consensus around protecting dreamers, around protecting farm workers. There's an incredible consensus these days around the resettlement of Afghan allies who are fleeing persecution in Afghanistan. So there are moments where we can find, the 60 votes we need in the Senate, the 218 in the House to get us to compromise. But it means that we've got to find this balance between security and compassion.
And Congresswoman, we just had a whole other monkey wrench thrown into this conversation, as Ali just mentioned, and that is the Afghan migrants and refugees that are fleeing for their lives, and many hoping to come to the United States. It ended up, starting out as a bipartisan initiative that we are obligated to bring them here, but we're already starting to hear whispers within the Republican Party, and the whispers are getting a little bit louder, about questioning whether there are security risks. Should we be welcoming all of these Afghans? And I want to get your perspective on that. Do you think this is going to become a political wedge issue? What role is Texas playing in welcoming these refugees? And will you be able to focus on both that issue and the refugees at the border?
You're right. Unfortunately, my Republican colleagues who have long felt that their go-to move on immigration is to fuel xenophobia and racism, that has unfortunately gotten worse over time. And I was really heartened, actually, when my colleague Jason Crow was able to get bipartisan support to expand the SIV, the special immigrant visas, but we have seen a steady drumbeat since then. You'll notice that, as an example, the minority leader, Kevin McCarthy, speaks only about ensuring that we get Americans safely out of Afghanistan. He didn't mention getting our allies and their families out of Afghanistan when he gave his remarks. I am very, very concerned about their ongoing xenophobia and what it does to our country. But, we have an opportunity today, right now, to rebuild our role and our place across the globe as the beacon, this shining light across across the globe that will live up to our values as a nation of immigrants and a place that is welcoming to refugees. My perspective is we've got to live up to those values. And I have visited the Fort Bliss a site where the Afghan refugees are being housed, where our guests are being processed. They are currently on humanitarian parole. So we've got a couple of years to make sure that we get their legal status adjusted. And Congress has a role to play in that as well over the long term, to make sure that we give them stability. These are folks who were vetted before arriving here and who will be on our military installation through the end of the process until they're ready to be released. And these are people who helped us. They and their family members put their lives on the line right alongside our military personnel, and we owe them. We owe them, and it is our obligation. You know, what happened in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, we're going to do have a lot of conversations. We're going to have a lot of hearings about it, including what happened over the last several months. But our job right now, it's on us as Americans to make sure that we greet these guests, these refugees, with dignity.
And Ali, history is yet to determine how President Biden will be treated and how his Leave Afghanistan policy will be viewed. But I think we can all agree that these images, especially the early days of the evacuations there, were horrific to see. And I want to get your take not only on what the Congresswoman said about what our obligations are in the United States, but then whether if this administration, given the chaos that ensued earlier this week, has enough bandwidth to focus on that issue, which will last much longer than August 31st. It's going to be months and years down the road, and also the border crisis.
So, this also goes back to one of your earlier questions. And, one of the things I think that the Biden administration has done wrong is really understand the politics of immigration. Now, they've got all these incredible policy people who are cranking away, getting the system to work, and that's really important. But in his circle, I don't think the president has somebody who understands, okay, what's the potential for immigration when I'm talking about both immigrants as well as refugees, to actually build a bigger coalition of Americans in support of immigration writ large. I think their initial miscalculation was around the refugee resettlement number earlier this year, where they set the number, really at Trump's level, and they said, well, maybe we'll increase it. Massive backlash. Now, with the Afghan allies question, they kind of did the same thing, right? They slow walked the special immigrant visa process. They almost saw kind of evacuating Afghan allies as an afterthought. And then all these images come out, and this massive outpouring of support for Afghan refugees becomes very clear. And now the president has changed his language, and now he speaks about evacuating Afghan allies kind of in the same breath. But the reality is like, we are not going to be able to evacuate everyone that we need to. So the administration, I think, has a few opportunities here when it comes to Afghan allies as well as the border. Number one, the fiscal year 2022 refugee resettlement cap is going to be set in the next 4 to 6 weeks. The administration needs to set that cap at a level high enough to account for the refugees, the number of refugees we're sure to see from Afghanistan. Number one. Number two, Congress, with leadership of the Congresswoman and her colleagues, needs to fund the refugee resettlement program so that these services can be provided. And number three, to get to the US-Mexico border, really clearly explain to the American public how the administration is securing the border. And apprehension doesn't necessarily mean that a person is apprehended and then released into the US. And apprehension, more times than not, is being apprehended and being turned around and returned to Mexico. Be clear in that. If the Biden administration is securing the border, own that security measure. And then ultimately and finally, many people voted for Joe Biden because he promised to treat immigrants and refugees compassionately. So again, own that. But this is all, so much of this is really, I think, the way the administration needs to communicate what they have done, what they are doing, and what they want to do in the immigration space.
And so, Congresswoman, that's sort of conflating both the humanitarian aspect, which we know President Biden ran on and is there and is legitimate, but also the political one. And on the one hand, we're hearing from the president on both issues, on the on the Afghan refugee crisis now unfolding, and also on the border crisis, that the buck stops here, I'm the president, I own it, but also I inherited this mess. How is that sitting with voters, obviously, as we're looking towards the midterms next year?
You know, I think that generally people are impatient. And as a public servant myself, and as someone who, speaks to her constituents consistently, I have learned that people want to see results as quickly as possible. And I get it. I get it, especially on immigration. I will tell you, as I mentioned, as Congress has punted year in and year out, and as Congress has done the same thing over and over and over again, which is this very border-centric approach instead of a more holistic approach, people feel like they want to see results. And to a point that Ollie made, I have been frustrated that the administration has not leaned in on immigration enough, because polling consistently shows that most Americans, even Republicans, believe that we need immigration. They just want to see it, a process that is orderly. It's the what they consider disorderly that is uncomfortable to them. Now, there are some, of course, that want to shut off our nation's doors completely. That is an absolutely self-defeating, short-sighted approach. We need people. Our census figures show we need people. Immigrants, research shows that immigrants are more law-abiding than native-born Americans, are more entrepreneurial than native-born Americans. So it is a win for us if we accept fundamentally that immigration is good, and most Americans do. It's how do we process them? How do we create something that's orderly in the eyes of the American public? That's why, again, I'll go back to my holistic approach. We need to open up pathways of legal immigration. If people had more access to legal pathways, they would not seek out undocumented, irregular pathways. I have spoken with enough migrants over the last 15 years of my life in El Paso, as I've spoken with migrants, they would far prefer to have a legal shot at getting into the United States than having to take a dangerous, treacherous journey. So let's do that. Let's open up legal pathways, and that will help create a queue and give people hope. Let's stop this border-centric approach and work on root causes. And let's also funnel people to ports of entry instead of between ports. So the Biden administration, I wish if they just said, look, immigrants are good for our country. I know the majority of you agree with me. Here's why. And it's going to take us some time to create an orderly system. Here's the goal. We need Congress to help. And he has said that in many ways. But immigration is such a thorny issue politically that I think a lot of folks prefer to not focus on it than to lean in. I think we need to lean in.
And Allie, to be fair, and to the administration, the president's credit, they are making some new reforms and adjustments. They just unveiled a plan to overhaul the U.S. asylum system recently, including doubling the staff, trying to speed up the processing at the Mexico border, and hiring 1,000 more asylum officers and another 1,000 more support staff. But that's not going to be implemented until the next few months at the very least. Are these some of the steps that you think the administration should be touting more? Are they effective? Is it more window dressing? What are your views?
Just the example of getting more asylum officers hired and into the system, I think is probably one of the most important things that can be done in terms of managing the situation at the U.S.-Mexico border. Because remember, these folks are coming by and large to apply for asylum. I'm not saying that all of them should receive asylum, but according to the law, they have the legal rights to make that application. So putting asylum officers in the position to hear those cases and to adjudicate those cases as quickly, in a timely manner, and frankly, in a way that these individuals also can get access to community-based legal services to assist in the development of their case, I think is just smart policy. But then if you communicate it to the public as, okay, we're setting up a process through which somebody can apply for asylum in a timely and orderly way. And if they're eligible, they move forward. If they're not eligible, they're then deported from the country. Though that is, they're putting the personnel, the logistics, and the infrastructure in place. Now they just need to communicate it.
So these are tangible improvements and effective improvements in your opinion, and much needed. I can't believe it in the last few minutes here, I haven't raised sort of the elephant in the room and why we are not together, and that is the pandemic and COVID, and we've sort of grown so accustomed to it, unfortunately. I'm wondering, Congresswoman, how much of an impact that this has had on obviously not just President Trump's last year in office, but President Biden now, and God willing, hopefully, we could get back to some sense of normality by next year. Will this help alleviate what we're seeing at the border now, or no?
I think that once we get a better handle on the pandemic domestically, that it will go a long way to helping us address international needs and to making sure that we're treating this pandemic in the global way that we need to, and we can begin helping other countries and getting beyond this immediate crisis. I mean, the fact that we have not yet turned a corner is unfortunately a testament to the rampant misinformation, to the dangerous lies that too many are telling, and to the politicization of public health. It's unbelievable to me how controversial this vaccination is, and in El Paso we are feeling it very acutely. We have exceeded the president's goals in terms of vaccination rates. We have over 80% of our population that's gotten at least one vaccine in their arms. We're leading the state. We are among the most vaccinated communities in the country. But for us, it is an international issue because we've got to get Ciudad Juarez, our sister city, as vaccinated so we can achieve regional herd immunity and open up our borders. And then hopefully we can see the end to Title 42 as well.
And what we've seen, almost 1 million people expelled over Title 42 since it was issued last year. And Ali, this is sort of an example of the president getting it from both sides, right? Obviously, Republicans are pointing to this record number of detentions there at the border, and Democrats saying, listen, the president isn't doing enough. Where does that leave Biden, and does that give him any sort of wiggle room for any policy amendments and adjustments going forward?
Well, I think the border is very interesting because it's several different communities all kind of along one line, right? I was in El Paso and Juarez probably about a month ago, and just to speak to what the Congresswoman said, I mean, the leadership on the ground in a place like El Paso as well as Juarez is tremendous. There are organizations helping migrants on either side of the border. People are getting access to shots, et cetera, et cetera. But you go further south and you get into the Rio Grande Valley. Now, the situation on the U.S. side, there are a lot of great organizations, but on the Mexico side, this is one of the most dangerous regions in the entire country. So there really needs to be, I think, a binational approach to security, health, and then trade and immigration from Brownsville all the way to San Diego. And that's really that's one of the big pieces that I think is missing. So as a result, the Biden administration has to kind of look at every community in a very different way. There's very little kind of coherence on the Mexican side of the border in terms of policy, which then leads to a level of incoherence on the U.S. side, because one community, Mexico will receive a family, another community that won't. So it's just very confusing. I do think it leaves Biden in a very difficult position, especially when they've just been so hesitant to speak to the issue in a very clear way. Hopefully that will change because, going into the 2022 midterms, immigration is going to be one of the top attacks from Republicans who are looking to unseat the House majority and the House of Representatives.
And let me end in the final few moments here just to get you both to respond to this Wall Street Journal editorial that I read recently, and it was titled "Biden's Cruel Immigration Policy. Migrants want to fill jobs in the U.S., but there's no legal path to enter the country." And I'm wondering, Congresswoman, does that headline resonate with your constituents? And let me just reverse that and go to Ali and say, does that resonate with any Republicans also, as you're sort of the non-political person here? Let me begin with you, Congresswoman.
I can't tell you how many business owners have told me about the labor shortage and about how they need hardworking people. And we have, over the course of the last decade, instead, we've we've cut legal pathways for people. And so this is why it is advantageous to us to open up legal pathways and to make sure that at every skill level, from engineers to folks who want to provide construction labor or meatpacking industry labor or hospitality labor, that they get a shot. If you give people a legal avenue, they would far more prefer to use that avenue than not.
Would you agree? I mean, myself, having grown up in Texas, I don't know what that economy, and I hear from business owners who are both Republican and Democrat who would argue the same thing. I don't know what our business, or I wouldn't be able to be in business without having these migrants here working with me. And I know the same can be said for California and other border states.
But you can also be said of a place like, Storm Lake, Iowa. So I've spent some time there, and it's a town of about 13,000 people in Northwest Iowa. Storm Lake has literally not just gotten back up on its feet, but is thriving because of immigrants and immigration to the small town for jobs. But then, I met with the school superintendent a year ago or so, and she was talking about actually having to build schools because, the population was growing. The mayor, most mayors of small towns, what are they contending with? A shrinking tax base, a hollowed out downtown. The mayor of Storm Lake, they're trying to figure out, okay, how do they make sure that their housing stock is going to grow fast enough to manage the population growth when almost every other town or county in the state of Iowa is shrinking? So I feel like those are the stories that can be kind of brought to the light here, and helps Republican lawmakers see that their constituents in very conservative parts of the country are seeing and understanding and really benefiting directly from the contributions of immigrants and refugees.
It wasn't so long ago that this was more of a bipartisan issue, right, to tackle. And it's sad that it's not in this environment. I guess there are a few bipartisan issues. But what I love about this conversation as we come to an end here is that it was not only had wonderful guests and brilliant guests to discuss this, but you came with solutions and statistics and data. It was wonderful speaking with you, and let's hope some people in the higher up authorities were listening to what you were saying, as well as your colleagues, Congresswoman. Thank you so much. Hopefully next year we'll be together in Austin.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate being a part of this.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.